Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we dive beneath the waves of time into a story that has haunted humanity for over 12,000 years. A tale of brilliance, betrayal, and a civilization that might have changed the course of history itself. 12,000 years ago, the world was not as you know it. Sea levels were lower, continents were connected, and in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there existed a civilization so advanced, so powerful, that when it vanished in a single day and night, the entire world forgot how to build pyramids, how to navigate by stars, how to measure the earth itself. Tonight, you will hear the entire story of Atlantis, from its mythical birth to its catastrophic end, and the clues that suggest it may have been real all along. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Imagine a world 12,000 years ago. The air was colder, cleaner. Ice covered much of the northern hemisphere. Mammoths roamed across the frozen plains. The Sahara was not a desert yet. It was a vast green savanna filled with rivers, lakes, and rain. And between the lands that we now call France and England, there stretched a wide plain known today as Doggerland, a place you could once walk across, where fishermen now pull up ancient bones from beneath the North Sea. It was a time before maps, before borders, before the word civilization even existed. Yet it was the dawn of something remarkable. Around 10,000 BCE, the Ice Age was ending. The great glaciers that had locked away the world's oceans for tens of thousands of years began to melt. Sea levels rose, slowly at first, then faster, more than 120 meters in total. Coastlines vanished, islands disappeared, whole cultures were swallowed by the rising tide. And in that great melting, something extraordinary and terrifying happened. A memory began to fade, a memory of what came before. Archaeologists call this period the pre-Atlantean age, a time when humans were supposed to be primitive hunters and gatherers. But what if they weren't? In the high plains of southeastern Turkey, beneath layers of soil untouched for millennia, stands a mystery, Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in the 1990s, it is over 11,600 years old, older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years. Its builders carved perfect circles of massive stone pillars, some weighing 20 tons each. The stones are adorned with precise carvings, lions, vultures, serpents, and strange symbols that seem to speak of a lost language of the stars. And here's the question that haunts every archaeologist who visits that site. How did hunter-gatherers, supposedly without agriculture, writing, or metal tools, build such a structure? Who taught them to move and balance stones heavier than anything in the modern world until cranes were invented? Who told them how to align their circles with the constellations? And why, after creating such beauty and complexity, did they bury it all under sand and walk away?
Some believe Göbekli Tepe was the temple of a forgotten people, the survivors of a catastrophe that erased their homeland. Others say it was a message left behind for the future, a marker of what had been lost. To understand how that loss could happen, we must look to the sky. Around 12,800 years ago, something struck the Earth. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas impact, a sudden, mysterious cooling event that lasted more than 1,000 years. In the span of a single generation, the world went from warming to freezing again. Forests burned, animals vanished, and human cultures that had begun to flourish were suddenly gone. Geologists have found microscopic spherules, tiny glass beads created by heat so intense it could melt rock, scattered across 4 continents. They've found layers of black sediment filled with soot, nanodiamonds, and platinum, a chemical fingerprint of a cosmic impact. A comet, perhaps, a shower of fragments that exploded in the atmosphere, igniting everything below. If that event truly happened, and the evidence suggests it did, then it may have reset civilization itself. The memory of what came before the ice, before the flood, vanished into smoke and ash. But humanity remembered, not with science, but with story. Every ancient culture on every continent tells of a great flood. Different names, same memory. In Sumeria, it was Utnapishtim, the immortal man of the Epic of Gilgamesh, who survived when the gods sent a flood to wash away mankind. He built a great boat, sealed it with pitch, and filled it with the seed of all living things. When the waters receded, his ship rested upon a mountain, and life began anew. In the Bible, it became Noah's Ark, the same story rewritten for a new age. A just man warned by God to save his family and the animals of the earth. The flood lasted 40 days and 40 nights, and when the dove returned with an olive branch, it marked the rebirth of humanity. In the Hindu Vedas, the story takes another form. The man Manu, warned by a talking fish, the god Vishnu in disguise, built a great boat to survive the flood that covered all the lands. When the waters fell, the fish guided him to safety atop the Himalayas. In Native American tribes, there are dozens of flood stories, of turtles that carried people to safety, of canoes that floated over mountains, of stars that fell and set fire to the earth. And in ancient Greece, before Plato ever wrote of Atlantis, there was the tale of Deucalion's flood, where Zeus, angered by human pride, sent rain for 9 days and nights until the world drowned. Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survived, and from the stones they cast behind them, a new humanity was born. Different languages, different gods, but one shared wound, one collective memory of the world ending and beginning again. And that brings us closer to the mystery of Atlantis, because when Plato wrote about it in 360 BCE, he wasn't inventing a fairy tale. He was preserving an echo of something humanity had already forgotten. He said he heard it from his ancestor Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver who had learned the story from Egyptian priests during his visit to Sais. They told him of a great civilization that existed 9,000 years before your time, that is, around 11,600 years ago, the exact time Göbekli Tepe was built and the Ice Age ended. A coincidence? Perhaps, but the timeline matches too well to ignore. Plato described Atlantis as a vast island empire beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was rich, radiant, and ruled by kings who were half god, half man. They built temples of gold, channels of crystal water, and harbors lined with ships of every kind. But over time, their power grew, and so did their arrogance. They turned from wisdom to greed, and the gods, seeing this corruption, sent earthquakes and floods that swallowed their island in a single day and night of misfortune. When Plato wrote that, 2,400 years ago, he wasn't writing history, he was writing memory. The memory of an age the world had already lost, the age before Atlantis. And yet, as you listen now, in your quiet room, far from the winds of that ancient world, you might feel that it never truly disappeared. Because deep down, in myths and monuments, in the alignment of stars and stones, that memory still whispers of a world that once was, of knowledge that once existed, of something forgotten, lost, vanished. But to understand Atlantis, we must first hear the story as Plato told it, in two dialogues that have haunted humanity for 2,400 years.
When Solon stood before the priests of Sais nearly 26 centuries ago, the world around him already felt old. The great pyramids of Egypt were ancient even to the Egyptians. Yet, when he asked about the origin of wisdom, about the beginning of mankind, the priests smiled and said, "You Greeks are like children. You remember nothing of what came before." That conversation would echo through time, because what the Egyptians told him was not myth, it was memory. They spoke of an age before the Nile, before Egypt itself, a time when their ancestors watched the sea swallow an empire beyond the western horizon, an island kingdom greater than all others, whose ships once sailed to every shore. They called it Atlantis. Solon listened, he recorded their words, and 200 years later, his descendant, Plato, transformed that tale into one of the most enduring mysteries in human history. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato described Atlantis as a land larger than Libya and Asia combined. It lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, and was the heart of a mighty confederation of kings. The Atlanteans possessed knowledge beyond comprehension. They measured the heavens, mastered geometry, and harnessed the power of the earth itself. Their cities shone with metals unknown to the Greeks: gold, orichalcum, and shining bronze. Water flowed in concentric canals through temples and gardens, perfectly designed with sacred geometry. Every element of their world reflected balance, until balance was lost. Plato wrote that the Atlanteans, once virtuous and wise, fell to arrogance. They began to conquer lands not out of need, but pride. They reached into the Mediterranean, waging war on ancient Athens itself. And for the first time, the world saw the light of wisdom clash with the shadow of greed. The gods, seeing the corruption of the once great island, decided its time had come. Earthquakes and floods struck without mercy, and in a single day and night, the island of Atlantis vanished beneath the waves. To Plato, this was not just history, it was a warning, a parable about power without humility. But to modernize, his story also hides a riddle.
How could he describe geological and astronomical details that only science would rediscover thousands of years later? When he said the destruction of Atlantis happened 9,000 years before Solon, he unknowingly pointed to the exact end of the Younger Dryas period, the same time when sea levels rose 120 meters, when ancient coastlines vanished, when the earth trembled from cataclysmic change. The priests of Sais told Solon that their civilization survived because they lived far from the sea. But the people of Atlantis, they said, lived too close to the heart of the ocean. When the waters rose, they were erased. Modern scientists still debate whether such a flood ever happened, but the evidence grows harder to ignore. Across the ocean floor, from the Caribbean to the Azores, sonar maps reveal vast ridges, plateaus, and sunken terraces that might once have stood above water. Along the coasts of India and Japan, underwater ruins lie buried beneath layers of silt. Cities like Dwarka and Yonaguni, both submerged at roughly the same time, 10,000 to 11,000 years ago. Could these be remnants of a forgotten age? Or are they just coincidences shaped by the restless earth? The answer depends on whether you believe the past is as simple as we've been taught. Because the further back we look, the more we find that knowledge appeared, vanished, then reappeared again, as if humanity was remembering, not discovering. How did the Sumerians, just 6,000 years ago, know the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle of 25,920 years? How did ancient Egyptians align the pyramids precisely with the stars of Orion's belt? How did pre-Incan builders move and fit stones weighing hundreds of tons with accuracy no modern crane can match? Some call it coincidence. Others whisper another word: inheritance. The remnants of a science passed down from those who came before Atlantis. Because if we step back, a pattern emerges, a global reset. Before 10,000 BCE, advanced stonework appears, then disappears. The same geometry repeats in temples across continents: spirals, serpents, suns, and stars. It is as if survivors of a vanished world spread fragments of memory wherever they went. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Andes, the Indus Valley. Every culture remembering the same cosmic wound in their own language. And so we arrive at the heart of the mystery. Why did this ancient knowledge vanish so suddenly? Was it destroyed by the flood? Forgotten by time? Or deliberately hidden, sealed beneath symbols and myths until the world was ready again? Plato himself hints at this secrecy. In Critias, he stops mid-sentence. The dialogue ends abruptly, as if lost to history. Some say he died before finishing. Others believe he said too much. But the message survives, that wisdom, once misused, must sleep until it can be born again. Even today, the fingerprints of that forgotten age remain. From the astronomical alignments of Machu Picchu to the perfect geometry of Giza, from the megaliths of Baalbek to the stone circles of Nabta Playa, humanity keeps rediscovering traces of a science it once knew by heart. Imagine standing at Göbekli Tepe again, those pillars carved with serpents and stars. Some researchers believe the carvings depict the sky as it appeared exactly 10,950 BCE, the time of the comet impact that began the Younger Dryas. If true, it means the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't primitive. They were remembering, recording the end of a world, their world. So who were they? Perhaps survivors from a land now lost beneath the Atlantic, a people who watched their cities drown and carried their knowledge inland to Egypt, to Anatolia, to the mountains of Peru. They became the seed of civilization, the teachers of the next dawn. And maybe, just maybe, that is why ancient texts say humanity did not learn, but relearned. Why Plato called Atlantis the first great city that fell so that others might rise. What if every myth, every sacred number, every alignment of stars and stone was not superstition, but remembrance, a language of survival written in architecture, geometry, and time itself? The Earth has forgotten many times, yet memory, like Atlantis, always tries to rise again. And as you listen now, with the quiet hum of the world around you, imagine the waves above that lost island still whispering through the centuries, of wisdom drowned but never dead. Because to understand Atlantis, we must first understand that civilizations are not born once, they are reborn again and again, each carrying the echo of the last. And somewhere beneath the Atlantic, that echo still waits.
Imagine the marble streets of ancient Athens in 360 BCE. The city hums quietly beneath the afternoon sun. In a shaded colonnade, Plato, philosopher, mathematician, student of Socrates, sits surrounded by his pupils. The world knows him for his dialogues, yet tonight, his voice will carry something different. Not logic, not philosophy, but memory, a story that crossed oceans and millennia. He begins with the words of his ancestor, Solon, the great lawgiver. 2 centuries earlier, around 590 BCE, Solon had traveled far from Greece, seeking wisdom older than his homeland itself. His journey led him south, across the Mediterranean, to Egypt, the land of the Nile, a place that had already seen empires rise and fall while Greece was still young. In the temple of Neith at Sais, Solon found what he was looking for. The temple's walls were covered in inscriptions, chronicles carved into stone long before the first Greek alphabet. The priests who guarded these records were men of quiet dignity, their lineage stretching back thousands of years. To them, time was not measured in generations, but in floods and stars. When Solon, with all the confidence of an Athenian, began to speak about the glory of Greek civilization, its heroes, its myths, its wisdom, the eldest priest listened and then gently interrupted him. "O Solon, Solon," he said, shaking his head with a sad smile, "you Greeks are but children. You have no old belief, no ancient science handed down by tradition, nor any knowledge hoary with age." That sentence, "You Greeks are but children," cut through time like a whisper meant for eternity. For in that single phrase, the priest revealed something extraordinary, that the Greeks, and perhaps the rest of the world, had forgotten an entire chapter of human history. Solon was stunned. "But how?" he asked. "We have records. We remember the floods of Deucalion and the great fires that scorched the earth." The priest replied, "Yes, and yet you remember only one deluge. Many have come before, and many more shall come again. Your people rise anew, each time young, each time forgetting what came before. But our people, we preserve memory. For when the waters rose and swept away all things, Egypt was spared, and so we kept the records of what the rest of the world forgot." Then, In the quiet echo of the temple, the priest began to tell him the story. A story recorded on stone more than 9,000 years earlier, about an age of wonders and a civilization now lost beneath the sea. 9,000 years before your time, O Solon, said the priest, there existed an island beyond the Pillars of Heracles. From that island came the greatest power the world had ever seen. Solon wrote down everything he could, the details, the geography, the tragedy, but he never finished turning those notes into poetry. He brought them home to Athens, where they passed to his family, and eventually to Plato. 200 years later, in Timaeus, Plato would immortalize the story as the most haunting dialogue ever written. In Timaeus, the tale begins not as a myth, but as a conversation about the nature of the universe. Plato's characters, Critias, Hermocrates, Socrates, and Timaeus, gathered to discuss the origin of creation, the balance of the cosmos, and the laws that govern both gods and men. But as Timaeus speaks of the stars, Critias interrupts with a promise. He says, "I have something older, a story told by my grandfather, who heard it from Solon himself, a story about the mightiest empire the world has ever forgotten." Timaeus then weaves the philosophy of creation, how order emerged from chaos, how divine reason shaped matter, how the world soul gave birth to time and motion. Yet beneath this cosmic order lies a reflection of Atlantis itself, a civilization built in harmony with divine proportion, where architecture, astronomy, and morality all mirrored the geometry of the heavens. The Egyptians had kept written records of this great island empire, an empire that existed 9,000 years before Solon, which places its fall around 9600 BCE, precisely when the Ice Age ended. In Egypt, the priests preserved the story through hieroglyphs carved into limestone, resistant to time, while the Greeks relied on oral tradition, fragile as the wind. That difference between written and spoken would decide what the world remembered and what it lost. The Egyptians told Solon that their ancestors watched Atlantis grow powerful beyond measure. Its fleets crossed the known world. Its kings ruled with divine blood. And yet, their downfall came not from war, but from forgetting the sacred balance that bound them to the gods. Plato ends Timaeus not with resolution, but with mystery. He leaves readers on the edge of revelation, a promise that the full tale would continue in another dialogue. That continuation would become Critias, the most detailed account of Atlantis ever written. But before that, Timaeus gives us something profound, the foundation of all myth, a cosmic blueprint of creation mirrored perfectly in the design of Atlantis itself, the heavens above and the island below, both built on circles, harmony, and divine proportion. Ring after ring, order after order, Plato wrote, the gods arranged all things by measure, and in that pattern, the fate of Atlantis was sealed, not by nature, but by symmetry undone. As you imagine Solon standing within the temple of Neith, hearing those words echo against stone walls older than memory, you can almost feel time folding in on itself. The priest's voice, steady as the Nile, passes through centuries, through Plato, through you, carrying the message that civilizations rise not only from the earth, but from remembrance.
The Egyptians carved their past into rock so that no flood could wash it away. The Greeks sang theirs into poems, and the winds scattered them. But Plato wrote it in reason. And reason, when spoken softly enough, can survive longer than stone. So tonight, as the waves roll against unseen ruins, the dialogue continues between gods, philosophers, and the echoes of a world forgotten. Because Timaeus was never just about the creation of the universe. It was about the creation of memory, and how, without it, even gods can fade into myth. But Atlantis was not always a paradise. To understand its rise, we must go back to the very beginning, to the age when gods walked the earth.
When the Timaeus dialogue ends, Plato opens another scroll, Critias. This is where myth turns into blueprint, where legend becomes architecture. The tone shifts from cosmic to earthly, from gods to the kingdom they once shaped. Critias begins with the priest's revelation carried down from Solon, that Atlantis was not just powerful, it was divine in its origin. Long before the flood, the island of Atlantis was blessed by Poseidon, god of the sea. Far from Olympus, he found a hill on a fertile plain where a mortal woman named Cleito lived alone after her parents had died. She was beautiful, wise, and pure of heart. Poseidon loved her deeply. But to protect her from mortal men, he encircled her hill with rings of land and water, alternating circles so perfect that even a bird could not cross them. From the air, it must have gleamed like a labyrinth of the gods. Poseidon then reshaped the island with divine symmetry, 5 circles in total, 3 rings of water and 2 of land. At the center stood Cleito's hill, rising gently above the sea. There, Poseidon built a palace of shining stone, fed by twin springs, one of warm water, one of cold. And on that sacred hill, Cleito bore 5 pairs of twin sons, the children of God and mortal. The eldest, Atlas, would rule the central island, his name becoming the soul of the empire. His 9 brothers governed the surrounding lands, each sworn to protect the whole. 10 kings in total, bound by divine law, bloodline, and justice. And through countless generations, the sons of Atlas ruled over a kingdom that spread across the sea, beyond the horizon of any Greek map. Plato describes it in numbers, as only a philosopher could. He wrote that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, and that the island was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Its central plain measured 3,000 by 2,000 stadia, roughly 555 by 370 kilometers, a vast, fertile land surrounded by mountains to the north and open to the sea to the south. The climate was temperate, the soil rich. Twice in the year, Plato wrote, the land bore fruit, once by the rains of heaven, and once by the moisture of irrigation. Now picture the capital city gleaming like a jewel in the heart of that plain. From the sea, sailors would approach a vast channel leading inward, wide enough for warships to pass, 2 by 2. Then, ring after ring, the city would rise before them. First, the outermost wall, gleaming in brass, the alloy of copper and tin, reflecting sunlight like flame. Inside that, the middle wall, sheathed in white tin, cool and shining like moonlight. And finally, the inner wall, covered in orichalcum,
the mysterious red gold metal said to outshine all others. Each wall encircled the next with mathematical precision. Bridges connected the rings, each 100 feet wide, guarded by gates and towers. Beneath the bridges, tunnels allowed ships to pass through, the largest enough to carry triremes, the mighty oared vessels of ancient warfare. The Atlanteans mastered engineering far beyond their age. They channeled the twin springs into a network of aqueducts, providing water and heat to every district. Their irrigation system formed a perfect grid across the plain, dividing the land into 10,000 square lots, each farmed by men loyal to their kings. They constructed tunnels beneath the rings, wide enough for fleets to pass unseen, and decorated the walls of their channels with carvings of dolphins, bulls, and waves, symbols of the sea god's power. Plato's description reads almost like a dream of perfection, a land where divine geometry ruled everything, from the pattern of its walls to the rhythm of its seasons. Ring after ring, wall after wall, the city rose from the sea, shining with the colors of heaven and fire. At the heart of the palace stood the Temple of Poseidon, 1 stadium long and 3 plethra wide, roughly 185 by 92 meters, adorned with ivory, gold, and silver. Inside, a colossal statue of Poseidon drove 6 winged horses, his sons standing around him as guardians. Around the temple, sacred bulls roamed freely. For each year, the kings met to renew their oaths before the god, sacrificing the bull as a sign of unity. There was no coinage, no hunger. The earth gave in abundance. The Atlanteans mined copper, tin, and orichalcum from their mountains and traded with lands beyond the sea, Egypt, the Mediterranean, even unknown continents to the west. Their knowledge of geometry and astronomy guided every decision. The city itself aligned with the stars, each canal marking the passage of equinoxes. Plato's precision in numbers makes the city feel alive, not a myth, but a memory recalled by reason. Yet behind its splendor lay the first shadow of its fall. For as generations passed, the divine blood of Poseidon thinned. The sons of Atlas married mortals, and though the kingdom prospered, greed slowly crept into its heart. The walls that once symbolized protection began to symbolize pride. The kings, once united, began to compete. The inner city, meant for worship, became the stage for power. They built monuments to themselves taller than temples, and their fleets sailed not for trade, but for conquest. Still, Critias at this point remains calm, descriptive. Plato's words hypnotic, as if lulling the reader to sleep inside perfection before awakening them to ruin. When you imagine the city, its gleaming concentric rings, its bridges over calm water, its harbors full of ships, it feels almost real. You can hear the hooves of horses echo across the marble bridges, the waves lapping against bronze hulls, the distant hum of thousands of people living in harmony with the sea. And yet, like a dream, harmony never lasts. The priests who told Solon this tale warned him, every civilization, no matter how divine, carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. The Atlanteans forgot humility. They forgot the laws of Poseidon. And so, in the generations that followed, their hearts hardened, their ambitions grew. They sought to rule not only their seas, but the entire known world. The dialogue ends abruptly. Plato never finished Critias. The final words describe the kings of Atlantis preparing for war against Athens. Then silence. The text stops mid-sentence, as if swallowed by the very ocean it described. Some scholars say the ending was lost. Others believe Plato left it unfinished on purpose, to let the reader imagine the inevitable. Because we all know how the story ends. Atlantis would rise to greatness, and then, in one day and one night of misfortune, it would fall.
When the sea was calm, and the stars mirrored themselves upon the endless waters, Atlantis entered its golden age, the era of harmony between gods and men. From the central island, Atlas and his 9 brothers governed 10 realms, each radiating outward like spokes of a divine wheel. They ruled not through conquest, but through order. Each kingdom had its own temples, cities, and harbors, yet all paid tribute to the sacred center, the island of Atlas, where the palace of Poseidon rose like the heart of the world. The 10 kings were bound by blood, law, and ritual. Their unity was not maintained by force, but by faith. Faith in Poseidon, the sea father, who gave them their islands. Once every 5 or 6 years, depending on the celestial alignment, they would gather in the temple of Poseidon for a sacred ceremony that defined the very soul of their civilization, the bull ritual. At sunset, under a sky painted gold and crimson, the 10 kings would approach the central courtyard barefoot, carrying only wooden staffs. There were no weapons, for this was not a time of war. They would enter the sacred enclosure where wild bulls, descendants of the gods' herds, roamed freely. With reverence, the kings would encircle the herd, choosing one bull to sacrifice. Using only their staffs, they would subdue it, a test of strength, patience, and unity. Once the bull fell, they would drag it to the altar of Poseidon, its body still trembling, its eyes reflecting the temple's torches. There, upon a stone pillar inscribed with the laws of Atlantis, they would offer its blood as a sign of renewal. The pillar stood within the innermost court, a monument of orichalcum covered with sacred writing. Then came the oath of kings. Each dipped his hand into the blood, swearing upon Poseidon's trident to uphold the divine law. The firelight flickered across their faces as they recited, "We shall never raise arms against our brothers. We shall aid any who are attacked, and no judgment of death shall pass unless 7 or more agree." These laws were not merely rules, they were balance itself, the reflection of divine order in mortal governance. When disputes arose among the 10 kingdoms, they would meet again at the temple, not by day, but by night. Torches lined the marble halls, their flames mirrored in the pools of sacred water. The kings sat in a half-circle, cloaked in silence. Each case was heard beneath the open sky, so that the gods could bear witness.
Their judgments were deliberate, slow as tides. When consensus came, it was recorded upon tablets of gold, not for display, but preservation. The Atlanteans believed that memory was sacred and that forgetting was a form of death. Under such laws, Atlantis prospered. There were no civil wars, no betrayals. Their borders extended peacefully across the islands and coasts of the Atlantic. The sons of Poseidon ruled wisely, their divine lineage unbroken. Marriage among royal bloodlines was strictly guarded. No foreign prince could claim the throne of Atlas. Through these early generations, Atlantis became a beacon of divine order, the ideal union between mortal ingenuity and divine will. It was said that when the kings gathered at night, the sea itself grew still, listening to their voices echo through the marble courtyards.
Beneath the soft blue glow of dawn, Atlantis shone like a dream carved from the heart of the sea. It was an age when divine hands still guided human craft, when technology and beauty walked together. The island was alive with rhythm, of windmills turning, of water channels whispering, of bells ringing across the harbors as the first ships sailed at sunrise. This was the golden age, the time when man mastered earth, water, and metal in perfect harmony. The heart of Atlantis beat in its mountains, rich with ores and glowing veins of orichalcum, a red gold metal said to be the blood of Poseidon. They mined it with prayers, melted it in volcanic furnaces, and hammered it into sheets that covered temples, gates, and altars. When the morning sun struck those walls, the city blazed like fire, a reflection of heaven upon the sea. Scholars later debated its nature: bronze, gold alloy, or a gift from the stars. But to the Atlanteans, it was sacred perfection. Beyond the mountains stretched the fertile plains, Atlantis's green heart. Twice each year the fields yielded crops, one from winter rain, another from summer irrigation. A main canal, 30 meters wide, encircled the plain like a silver ribbon, while smaller channels divided the land with precision. Wood, fruits, and herbs flowed toward the shipyards, and plants that glowed faintly at night or healed the sick filled their markets, gifts of Poseidon's touch. Their architecture was unmatched: temples plated in silver, roofs crowned with gold, ivory ceilings inlaid with gems and orichalcum. At the center stood Poseidon's colossal statue, driving 6 winged horses across the waves, surrounded by Narratids in silver and sapphire. The city glowed with lamplight distilled from sea oils that never smoked. Heated floors, marble halls, and steaming baths spoke of comfort mastered without greed. Bridges arched across concentric rings. Aqueducts fed gardens and training fields where warriors and scholars coexisted. Music floated in the air, lyres, flutes, and waves against the harbor. The outer ring bustled with ships, war fleets, traders, and fishermen. Vessels came from Egypt, Libya, and lands beyond the sunset, perhaps the Americas. The docks carved into stone rose tier by tier, housing triremes beneath vaulted roofs. For Atlantis, the sea was not a barrier, it was a highway. Their navy numbered 1,200 ships guarded by the trident.
The land army, drawn from 60,000 districts, could muster millions, disciplined, prepared, but restrained. They prized peace above conquest. Knowledge was their faith. Astronomers, philosophers, and metallurgists studied stars, tides, and metals that sang when struck by light. Every building aligned with constellations, every canal mirrored the heavens. Atlantis lived as if part of a divine equation, every law, every song in harmony with the cosmos. No hunger, no poverty, no war. But as centuries passed, their humility waned. The sons of Atlas sought glory over wisdom. Gold replaced memory. Pride replaced faith. Priests warned, when gold outweighs memory, the sea will remember. They did not listen. And still the city glittered, laughter echoing, sails bright as clouds. It was paradise, radiant, breathing, alive. As night fell, torches shimmered across the rings like constellations upon the water. Atlantis slept, dreaming of eternity, unaware eternity had already begun to end.
For many generations, Atlantis lived in balance. They were children of the sea god, born of both water and light, half divine, half mortal. And as long as that divine spark endured within them, they lived by the sacred law. Plato wrote, "For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws. But divinity fades, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. The first kings, the direct sons of Poseidon and Cleito, still bore the brilliance of gods. Their lifespans stretched across centuries. Their minds grasped the secrets of nature itself. They saw mathematics not as numbers, but as the language of heaven. Their temples were not built for glory, but gratitude. They governed not for power, but harmony. Yet time is the great dissolver. By the second generation, that divine fire had dimmed. Only a quarter god remained within their blood. They still ruled wisely, but the light behind their eyes began to soften. By the 10th generation, the blood of Poseidon had thinned to a whisper. The gods had become men, and men forget. Slowly, generation by generation, they forgot what they were. They forgot the sound of Poseidon's voice in the waves. They forgot the reason for the bull ritual, that it was not sacrifice but remembrance. They forgot that orichalcum was meant to honor the gods, not to adorn their crowns. The kings, once united under sacred oath, began to quarrel. Quietly at first, then with fury. The rituals of the bull became empty theater. The sacred oath of blood was still recited, but its meaning had drained away. The temple meetings, once solemn and pure, turned into councils of politics and ego. And outside the palace walls, the signs of decay multiplied. The gap between the rich and poor widened. The noble families built marble mansions while farmers labored in silence. The songs of gratitude turned into songs of conquest. Children no longer studied the stars to honor Poseidon, but to map new lands to conquer. The priests wept,
but their words were no longer heard. The kings still prayed, but only to themselves. Their lifespans shortened from hundreds of years to tens. Their memory shrank, their patience dissolved. The wisdom that once came from divine blood now vanished like mist at sunrise. And though their architecture remained beautiful, though their ships still glided across the sea, a sickness had entered their hearts. Not a sickness of body, but of soul. They had inherited perfection, but perfection without humility always decays.
As the divine spark faded, ambition grew. The kings who once governed in harmony began to crave dominion. They turned their gaze outward, toward lands beyond the horizon. And so began the age of conquest. Plato wrote, "They had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. The armies of Atlantis sailed eastward through the straits, vast fleets with bronze prows that cut through the dawn. They conquered North Africa, from the deserts of Morocco to the sands of Egypt. They seized Europe, from the rocky shores of Spain to the green hills of Italy. Island after island in the Mediterranean fell under their rule. Trade routes became tribute routes. Gold, grain, and slaves flowed into the capital like rivers. The Atlanteans, once seen as gods, were now feared as tyrants. The old law forbidding war between kings was forgotten. The sacred bond was broken. They imposed taxes on every conquered land, demanding wealth and labor in Poseidon's name, though the god no longer guided them. The once holy orichalcum was no longer reserved for temples. It was reforged into weapons, spears, shields, and armor that gleamed red beneath the sun. Their treasuries overflowed with gold and silver. They built palaces higher than the temples, hiring slaves from conquered nations to expand their walls. The marble that once sang hymns to Poseidon now echoed with the laughter of excess. The noble families competed in luxury. Golden feasts, jeweled thrones, garments woven with threads of silver. The bowl ritual became a spectacle for amusement, not faith. And the festivals that once honored the gods turned into orgies of indulgence, filled with wine, music, and flesh. They forgot, they abandoned, they lost. They forgot who gave them the sea. They abandoned humility for pride. They lost the favor of the gods. The priests whispered that the sea was watching, that the tides rose higher each year, that the wind carried whispers of warning. But no one listened. For when man believes himself divine,
he cannot hear the gods anymore.
Plato's words grow heavy in the final lines of Critias. He does not shout, he mourns. He writes, "For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws and well affectioned towards the God whose seed they were. For they possessed true and in every way great spirits, uniting gentleness with wisdom. They despised everything but virtue, caring little for gold and property, which seemed only a burden to them. They were not intoxicated by luxury, nor did wealth deprive them of self-control." Then his tone darkens. He writes, "But when the divine portion began to fade away and became diluted too often with mortal admixture, and the human nature got the upper hand, they behaved unseemly. To him who had eyes to see, they appeared base, having lost the fairest of their gifts. But to those blind to truth, they still seemed glorious and blessed, at the very time when they were full of avarice and unrighteous power." Atlantis had become hollow glory, shining on the surface, rotten within. They hoarded wealth without purpose. They enslaved nations without mercy. They broke treaties, mocked the gods, and turned faith into vanity. Diplomacy was replaced by violence, honor by lies, and justice by fear. In the streets of the capital, statues of Poseidon still stood, but their altars were cold. The fountains still flowed, but no one stopped to pray. The great temple, once filled with hymns, echoed only with silence and the faint hum of wind. And somewhere deep beneath the waves, the sea began to stir. The tides pulled harder. The earth trembled faintly. The priests whispered, "The sea remembers." Plato's Critias ends not with closure, but with thunder, an unfinished sentence like a breath caught before the storm. What follows belongs to myth, yet feels like memory. The gods had been watching. From the highest heavens, they saw the once holy island of Atlantis glittering with gold and arrogance. They saw its temples now filled not with prayers, but with pride. And when the divine order that once guided man began to collapse, Zeus, ruler of gods and men, rose from his throne. Plato wrote, "Zeus, the god of gods, who rules according to law, and is able to see into such things, perceiving that an honorable race was in a woeful plight, and wanting to inflict punishment on them, that they might be chastened and improve,
collected all the gods into their most holy habitation, which, being placed in the center of the world, beholds all created things. The scene was Mount Olympus, the heart of the cosmos, its summit shrouded in light so radiant that even the stars seemed to bow. There, in a vast hall of crystal and storm cloud, Zeus sat upon his throne of thunder. His eyes blazed like lightning contained within flesh. One by one the gods gathered: Poseidon, the father of the fallen race; Athena, goddess of wisdom; Apollo, lord of harmony; Ares, god of war; and Hera, queen of the heavens. The hall was silent. Outside, thunder rolled like a heartbeat. Zeus stood, his voice carrying through the pillars of eternity. "They have forgotten their divine heritage," he said. "They have enslaved the innocent. They wage war not for justice but for greed. They dishonor the temples built in our names. They have become drunk on power and gold." Each word struck like a hammer, echoing across the cosmos. Poseidon lowered his trident. His face was shadowed with sorrow. "They are my children," he said softly. "Once pure, now blind. The ocean gave them life. I had hoped it would teach them humility." Athena's eyes flashed. "They had wisdom," she said bitterly, "but they turned it into cunning. Knowledge was meant to elevate the soul, not arm the hand." Apollo, radiant yet somber, spoke next. "They no longer sing. Their lyres are silent. Their poets write for coin, not for truth. Their beauty has no meaning." Ares laughed, a sound of iron and fire. "Let them burn," he said. "War purifies. This is the way of man." Hera raised her scepter. "No," she said coldly, "this is the way of pride, and pride must be broken before the seed of humility can grow again." Zeus looked across the assembly of gods, his face calm, but his eyes storming. "They must be punished," he said, "not for vengeance, but for remembrance. Let them be chastened, that they may one day rise again wiser than before." And so it was decreed. Not annihilation, but atonement. A punishment not of wrath, but of renewal. Atlantis would fall, yet its story would survive, carried across time as a warning to every civilization that would follow. That was the last moment of mercy. And there Plato's account stops, as if struck by silence itself.
Before the waves rose, before the ground began to tremble, there was war. A final act of arrogance that sealed Atlantis' fate. The kings, drunk with power, turned their eyes eastward toward the cradle of the old world. Their ambition was no longer to rule the seas, but to dominate the earth itself. Plato wrote in Timaeus, This vast power, gathered into one, endeavored to subdue at a blow our country and yours, and the whole of the region within the straits. Then, Solon, your country shone forth in the excellence of her virtue and strength among all mankind. The Atlantean armadas filled the horizon, fleets so vast that the morning sun glittered across thousands of bronze prows. Each ship carried legions of soldiers in armor of red and gold, their sails emblazoned with the trident of Poseidon. They swept through the Mediterranean like a living storm. Cities fell, islands surrendered, kingdoms paid tribute or were erased from the map. From Libya to Egypt, from Spain to Italy, all bowed before the empire of Atlantis, all but one. In the heart of the Aegean, a small, defiant city prepared to stand alone, Athens. Its people were few, its walls modest, its army humble. But within them burned a light that Atlantis had long forgotten, the light of virtue. They were not rich, but they were free. They were not powerful, but they were just. While Atlantis marched for gold, Athens rose for honor. The invasion came with thunder. The Atlantean fleet poured through the Strait of Gibraltar, a wall of warships stretching as far as the eye could see. The sea shook under the rhythm of 1,000 oars. The sky darkened with smoke from their fires. Their chariots rolled across conquered plains, their banners blazing like fire against the dawn. But Athens did not flee. The Hellenic allies, fearful, broken, abandoned her. Still, Athens stood alone, its warriors silent and ready, their shields marked not with tridents, but with the owl of wisdom. The first clash came at dawn. Bronze met bronze, spear met shield, sea met flame. The Atlantean war engines hurled fire across the water, their triremes crushing smaller ships in waves of fury. Yet the Athenians fought like lions. They did not yield. They fought not for land, nor for treasure, but for what they called arete, excellence of soul. The battle raged for days. The Mediterranean turned red beneath the sun. When the smoke cleared, it was not the mighty who remained, but the virtuous. Plato wrote, "She was preeminent in courage and military skill, and was the leader of the Hellenes. And when the rest fell off from her being compelled to stand alone, after having undergone the very extremity of danger, she defeated and triumphed over the invaders, and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell within the pillars." The impossible had happened. The empire of Atlantis, invincible, divine, immeasurable, had been humbled by a single city. Its armies shattered, its generals slain, its fleets burned to cinders. The Athenians did not conquer, they liberated. They freed every nation enslaved by the Atlantean crown, and sent the remnants of the once mighty armada back through the straits, limping toward home. For the first time in thousands of years, the Atlanteans tasted defeat, and the gods watched. It was not the strength of Athens that moved them, it was her virtue. For in the courage of mortals, they saw the divine flame that Atlantis had lost. The lesson was clear. The smallest nation, guided by truth, could humble an empire drunk on pride. And yet, even after their defeat, the kings of Atlantis did not repent. They rebuilt their fleets,
raised new temples and filled them not with prayers, but with gold. Their hearts had hardened beyond salvation. The priests of Poseidon pleaded for humility. The signs of the coming doom were already there: tremors beneath the sea, strange lights in the sky, tides that refused to obey the moon. But the kings ignored them. Their laughter echoed through marble halls as they planned revenge. In Athens, the people returned to peace, never knowing they had just survived the final dawn of an age. And far to the west, on that glittering island that had once been paradise, the earth itself was beginning to whisper. The judgment of Zeus had been spoken. The war was over, but the storm had only begun.
It began not with thunder, but with silence. The kind of silence that feels too heavy, too still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. In the hours before dawn, the priests of Poseidon gathered in the temple, sensing a change in the air. The torches flickered without wind. The ocean, usually restless, had gone motionless, a mirror of black glass beneath the stars. Then the signs came. The sun rose red as blood, casting its reflection over a sea that no longer shimmered, but boiled faintly at the edges. Birds screamed and fled inland. Horses refused to drink. Fish surfaced in droves, gasping as though the water itself had turned against them. And from the depths the island trembled, once, then again, deeper, stronger. The priests turned to the sky and whispered, "The gods are awake." In the city below, life went on. The markets opened. The nobles feasted. The laughter of children echoed through marble courtyards. But the ground did not stop moving. Statues quivered. The waters in fountains rippled with unnatural rhythm. Then, at noon, the sea began to withdraw. Slowly, unnaturally, it pulled away from the shores, bearing the seabed for miles. Ships tilted, their hulls groaning. People rushed toward the receding waters, shouting, pointing, laughing in disbelief. They did not understand. The priests ran through the streets, crying warnings, "Back to the mountains!" But few listened. How could paradise die? At the temple, the high priest fell to his knees before the great statue of Poseidon. "Father of the deep, forgive them. They have forgotten you, but remember they are still your blood." Yet even as he spoke, the walls groaned. A crack split the marble floor, running from the altar to the doorway like a wound. A low rumble grew beneath the earth, not sound, but vibration, the growl of a planet awakening from its patience. Then, without warning, the sky tore open. A light brighter than the sun flashed across the horizon. It was as if the heavens themselves had split, a scream of thunder without rain. From the mountains to the sea, the ground convulsed. Palaces crumbled, powers shattered, statues toppled like trees in wind. The island began to break apart, the concentric rings of the capital tearing like parchment. Bridges collapsed into chasms of steam and dust. The people screamed, running through streets that no longer existed. Fires burst from beneath the earth, geysers of molten rock piercing the sky. From the outer harbor came a sound no human had ever heard, the roar of the ocean returning. The sea, which had fled hours before, came rushing back with vengeance. Walls of water, black, shimmering, alive,
rose higher than the tallest temples. They advanced, unstoppable, swallowing everything in their path. The first wave hit the outer city. Ships were lifted like leaves, hurled across the air, crushed against marble towers. The next wave devoured the middle ring, sweeping horses, soldiers, and markets into the churning abyss. The final wave, taller than mountains, struck the sacred hill itself. The temple of Poseidon shuddered. The great statue cracked, and as the priests clung to the altar, the sea claimed them. The last sound was not screaming, but the deep, echoing crash of water meeting stone, the voice of Zeus fulfilling his decree. It lasted 1 day and 1 night. That was all. When the dawn came again, there was no island, only the endless ocean rippling softly under a pale sky. The smoke had cleared. The wind was gentle once more. But beneath the waves, where once stood marble palaces and golden spires, there was only silence. The sea had erased everything, every wall, every statue, every song. Yet memory has its own current. The survivors, a handful of fishermen who had fled to the mountains before the flood, would tell their children what they saw. Those children would tell their own. Across generations, the story drifted eastward to Egypt, to Sais, where the priests wrote it down in sacred texts. And from there, 2,000 years later, it reached the ears of Solon, and through him, Plato. Atlantis did not vanish completely. It endured in words, in myths, in dreams, in the hearts of those who wondered what happens when greatness forgets grace. Some say the island still lies beneath the sea, buried under layers of mud and coral. Others say it sank deeper than any ocean, into a realm beyond reach, where the gods keep the memories of the fallen. Perhaps both are true, for the real Atlantis was never just a place. It was a mirror, a reflection of humanity itself. Plato ended his tale with silence, but the meaning of that silence was clear. Every empire, every city, every soul that rises without humility will one day hear the same sound, the echo of waves reclaiming what pride has built. And so, in a single day and night, the most powerful civilization the world had ever known became a whisper beneath the tide. If you listen closely, when the wind crosses the ocean at dusk, you might still hear it, the faint hum of marble sinking, the cry of a trident breaking, the sigh of gods remembering. Atlantis is gone, but the lesson remains.
After the waters closed over Atlantis, the waves did not silence the story, they amplified it. Across centuries, the memory refused to die. From Plato's pen in 360 BCE to the explorers of the modern age, the search for the lost world became an obsession that crossed oceans, cultures, and generations. The philosopher had said, "In a single day and night, the island of Atlantis disappeared beneath the sea," but he never told us where. That single mystery, that open question, became a map that no compass could chart, yet everyone longed to follow. In the late 19th century, Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman and visionary writer, revived the legend. In 1882, he published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, arguing that every great civilization, from Egypt to the Maya, had sprung from the ashes of Atlantis. He believed it was the cradle of all human knowledge, the seed of culture scattered by the flood. His ideas, bold and romantic, ignited imaginations across continents. Newspapers printed maps of the Atlantic with possible locations marked by black dots. Scholars scoffed, dreamers believed. Decades later came Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who claimed through trance readings that Atlantis had been real and that its people wielded crystals capable of harnessing energy greater than electricity itself. He said its destruction came not from divine wrath, but from human arrogance, a misuse of power that split the earth. To his followers, Atlantis was not myth, it was memory. And they believed its ruins still lay waiting beneath the waves, preserved by time until humanity was wise enough to find them again. Then came scientists like Robert Ballard, the explorer who discovered the wreck of the Titanic. When asked about Atlantis, he didn't laugh. Instead, he said, "The idea of a civilization destroyed by a flood, that's not fiction, it's history." Ballard reminded the world that seas have risen 120 meters since the Ice Age. Entire coastlines vanished. Cities along the ancient Black Sea shore now sleep underwater. Perhaps, he suggested, the legend of Atlantis wasn't about one place at all, but many. A collective memory of every city humanity ever lost to the sea. But why, after thousands of years, do we still search? Why do satellites scan the ocean floor? Why do divers risk their lives in uncharted trenches? Why do writers, filmmakers, and dreamers still whisper the name Atlantis as if it holds a key to something sacred? Perhaps because Atlantis represents the impossible hope that we were once wiser than we are now, that somewhere in the deep lies proof that humanity once lived in harmony with nature, art, and divine order, before forgetting how. The search continues not because we doubt Plato's warning, but because we fear it may still apply. We look for Atlantis not to find a city, but to find ourselves.
Every age has its Atlantis, and every empire, when it rises too high, casts the same reflection. Atlantis was not destroyed by the sea alone. It fell to pride, the belief that power could outlast humility. And when we look at the modern world, the echo feels uncomfortably familiar. We build towers that scrape the sky, harvest the heart of the earth for fuel, and call it progress. We divide nations with wealth and war, while the oceans rise quietly beneath our feet. We invent wonders of science, yet forget wisdom. The Atlanteans too mastered their world until their mastery mastered them. Plato wrote that the gods punished Atlantis, not to destroy, but to teach. And still, thousands of years later, we repeat the same lesson, written this time in carbon and steel. The greed that devoured Atlantis thrives in our markets. The ambition that drowned an empire lives in our cities. The arrogance that defied the gods echoes in our treatment of the planet that sustains us. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. Each generation hears the rhyme a little louder. The melting poles, the burning forests, the sinking islands, the displaced millions. We call it climate change. Plato would have called it karma. If Atlantis is a myth, it is the truest myth we have, because it tells us the pattern of forgetting. We rise, we create, we conquer, we consume, we ignore. Then nature answers, always gently at first, then suddenly. And yet there is still time. The lesson of Atlantis is not despair, but remembrance, a warning written in water. If we forget balance, we will be reminded. Long after the waves took the island, Atlantis rose again, not from the sea, but from imagination. It lives in stories, films, and dreams, in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, in Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire, in countless books, games, and songs that still ask the same question: what if it was real? Every generation rewrites Atlantis in its own image. A paradise lost, a warning ignored, a treasure waiting beneath the tide. But perhaps the endurance of the legend has little to do with geography and everything to do with meaning. We don't return to the story because we think we'll find a sunken city. We return because it speaks to something ancient inside us, the knowledge that all greatness is fragile, and that wisdom once lost is the hardest treasure to recover. Atlantis endures because it mirrors our fears and our hope. It tells us that beauty can exist, but never without humility. That power can create, but only if it remembers compassion. And maybe in some way, that's what makes Atlantis eternal. Real or myth, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the echo it left behind, a voice whispering through history, reminding us to build wisely, to live gently, and to never forget that even the brightest civilizations can sink if they forget the sea that carries them. So when you close your eyes tonight and listen to the quiet hum of the ocean, remember,
Somewhere beneath those waves, truth sleeps. Not the truth of stone or ruins, but the truth of human nature. Because Atlantis was never just under the sea. It has always been within us. The tides of history have fallen silent, yet their echo still reaches us. The great cities have turned to sand, the temples have sunk beneath the waves, and the songs of Atlantis have long faded, but the lesson never did. Beneath the myth lies something deeper, something timeless, waiting to be understood. So tonight, as we stand beneath the same stars that once looked down upon Atlantis, a question arises. Not about ruins or maps or lost treasures, but about us. Why does this story matter to you, to me, to the world, right now, in 2025? It's not about whether Atlantis was real. It's not about where it sank. It's about what we've become. Because the myth of Atlantis was never just about an island. It was a mirror, a reflection of humanity's greatest strength and our oldest weakness. Like the Atlanteans, we've built a world of miracles, cities that touch the clouds, machines that think, rockets that reach the edge of the stars. Yet beneath all the brilliance, we face the same dilemma. We have mastered everything except ourselves. And now, like they once did, we stand at the crossroads between wisdom and arrogance, harmony and hubris, survival and collapse. This chapter is not about remembering Atlantis. It's about realizing we are living in Atlantis again.
History doesn't die. It disguises itself. Every empire that has fallen left a shadow behind, and those shadows walk among us still. The rise and fall of Atlantis was not a singular event, but a cycle, a rhythm, and that rhythm is playing again. In the ancient world, Atlantis reached the peak of innovation. They built aqueducts that tamed rivers, temples that pierced the sky, engines of bronze that glistened in sunlight. They believed sincerely that their wisdom could outshine the gods. We have conquered nature, they thought. Nothing can stop us now. But they forgot. Every empire that believes it's untouchable already stands on the edge of the abyss. Fast forward thousands of years, and the scenery has changed, but the pattern has not. We too stand in an age of wonders. Artificial intelligence writes poetry, paints portraits, predicts disease. Spacecraft leave the solar system. Quantum machines learn faster than the human mind. We live inside miracles, and yet the arrogance feels familiar. We say technology will fix everything. But who decides what everything means? We say AI will make us gods. But who will teach the gods to be kind? From Silicon Valley's motto, "Move fast and break things," to the blind faith in cryptocurrency before the 2022 collapse, we see the same illusion that innovation equals progress and speed equals wisdom. But Atlantis too moved fast. They built faster than they understood, created faster than they reflected, until one day the world they built outpaced the souls that built it. We are repeating that race. In 2011, a nuclear plant in Fukushima exploded after being called 100% safe. In 2023, deep learning algorithms generated wars of misinformation faster than truth could keep up. And in 2025, we live in a world where machines simulate empathy better than humans express it. The Atlanteans thought they ruled nature. We believe we've outsmarted it. But the truth remains unchanged. You cannot control what you do not respect. Perhaps the fall of Atlantis wasn't divine punishment. Perhaps it was simply cause and effect. The law that says every civilization that forgets humility must eventually remember it through suffering. The question is no longer whether Atlantis existed, but whether we are becoming it. Atlantis was not destroyed in a single moment of divine anger. Its fall began quietly in its own streets. Gold piled higher than grain. Marble palaces reached for the sky while the farms below withered. The kings ruled from shimmering towers while the workers labored unseen in the shadow of their glory. The elite called it prosperity. The people called it exhaustion. And when the walls between them grew too high, they forgot that every empire is only as strong as the poorest who believe in it. Now, look around. The year is 2025. The richest 1% control nearly half the planet's wealth. Billionaires launch rockets into space while millions can't afford clean water. Entire nations exist for profit, not people. The modern palaces are no longer built from orichalcum, but from algorithms. The new temples are glass towers glowing above cities that can no longer breathe. Social media turns us into digital tribes. The privileged scroll past suffering as if it were fiction, while the forgotten shout into silence. In France, protests shake the streets. The elites don't understand us. In the United States, the battle isn't left versus right anymore. It's those who have versus those who never will. Across the world, the Eat the Rich movement grows not from envy, but despair. This is not new. Plato saw it 2,400 years ago. When power becomes inheritance instead of responsibility, When leaders serve themselves instead of their people, the gods don't need to destroy the city destroys itself. Atlantis was undone, not by war or storm, but by imbalance. The few rose too high, the many sank too low, and the bridge between them broke. We are walking the same bridge now. And if we forget that equality is the foundation of endurance, we may one day look up and see the reflection of our skyscrapers shimmering on the surface of a rising sea.
Atlantis believed it could command nature. They mined the mountains, rerouted rivers, harvested forests until the land itself began to rebel. When the last trees fell and the soil turned to dust, they built canals to feed their crops, never realizing the sea they tamed would one day take it all back. And it did, in a single day and night. The tragedy of Atlantis wasn't just myth, it was a prophecy. And it's being fulfilled again. One storm, one drought, one wildfire at a time. In 2025, we are no longer guessing. The data is clear. Global temperatures have risen 1.5 degrees Celsius, the threshold of irreversible change. Half of all coral reefs, the nurseries of the ocean, are dead. Floods, droughts, and wildfires are 400% more frequent than 50 years ago. 150 species vanish every day, quietly erased before we even name them. The Amazon rainforest, once the planet's lungs, now exhales more carbon than it absorbs. Nature has stopped whispering, it's roaring. But like Atlantis, we treat the roar as background noise. We build higher walls, bigger cities, stronger economies, forgetting that no wall stands against the tide. Perhaps divine punishment was never about gods at all. Perhaps it was the Earth's way of restoring balance, a planet too generous, reminding its children what it means to live in harmony, not dominion. The Atlanteans ignored the signs until the last moment, until the sky cracked and the sea rose to claim them. We have more warnings, more knowledge, more time, and yet we move slower than ever. They had one day and one night. We may have 1 century, maybe less. The end of Atlantis was not an apocalypse. It was a reset, a moment when the earth reclaimed what arrogance had borrowed. And if history truly rhymes, our verse is already being written. What comes next isn't a prophecy of doom, but a call to awakening. Because the myth of Atlantis was never just a story about loss. It was a reminder that the power to change the ending has always belonged to us. We began this journey with a simple question. Was Atlantis real? Through 7 chapters, we have traveled from golden pyramids to the night the sea swallowed them whole, from glory to ruin, from myth to message. But here, at the final chapter, we realize something crucial.
We have been asking the wrong question all along. The truth is, it doesn't matter whether Atlantis existed. The question that truly matters is this: do we want to become the next Atlantis? And unlike them, we still have time to choose. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, he wasn't describing a lost island. He was describing a reflection, a mirror held up to every civilization that believes it cannot fall. And when we look into that mirror today, what we see is uncomfortably familiar. The same patterns repeating, the same arrogance disguised as progress, the same silence before the storm. The myth has returned, not in the ocean, but in us. The first pattern: technological hubris without wisdom. Atlantis believed that technology was salvation, that progress itself was virtue, and growth was infinite. Their engines and aqueducts, their canals and temples were seen as proof that they had mastered the laws of nature. We are too advanced to collapse, they thought. The gods made us perfect. But progress without humility is just speed without direction. And even the most magnificent ship can sink if it forgets to respect the sea. Fast forward to 2025. We tell the same story, only louder. We say AI will fix climate change someday. We say inequality will balance itself eventually. We say there's an app for every problem, as if the solution to the human condition can be downloaded. Our faith has shifted from gods to algorithms, but the worship remains the same. We trust machines more than wisdom, and convenience more than conscience. Look around. The FTX collapse of 2022, $32 billion evaporated overnight because millions believed in the perfection of a code that had no morality. AI hallucinations, systems that fabricate lies but are trusted more than truth itself. Social media, built to connect us, yet never have humans felt more alone. We live in an age where intelligence grows faster than wisdom can guide it. Technology races ahead, ethics limps behind. We create power before we understand its cost. Like Atlantis, we are brilliant but blind. Every tool we invent changes the world, but not every change is progress. The Atlanteans built wonders to outshine nature. We build machines to replace it. And both times the same question hangs in the air. When does creation become destruction? When does innovation become arrogance? The second pattern: inequality destroys civilizations. Atlantis, in its final centuries, glittered with wealth, but only for a few. The kings and elites lived in palaces of orichalcum and gold, while the workers starved in silence. The gods, Plato wrote, turned away not because of sin, but because of imbalance. When harmony is broken, collapse is not a punishment, it's gravity. And now, that same imbalance grows again. In 2025, 1% of humanity owns 45% of the planet's wealth. During the pandemic, billionaire fortunes doubled, while over 100 million people fell into poverty. The average CEO earns 670 times more than a worker. In 1965, it was 20 times. We call it the economy, but in truth, it's the same structure that once cracked the walls of Atlantis. The distance between palaces and poverty is not just physical, it's moral. And when that gap becomes too wide, the bridge collapses. The warning signs are already visible. Riots in France in 2023, citizens shouting that the elites don't understand us. In the United States, polarization so deep that democracy feels like a frayed thread. Around the world, the phrase, "eat the rich," is no longer satire, it's a symptom. History has recorded this moment before.
every civilization that reached this level of disparity, Rome, the Maya, Atlantis, fell within 50 years. Not from invasion, not from disaster, but from within. Because when a society worships wealth over worth, it forgets what holds it together. The Atlanteans learned that lesson too late. Will we? And then comes the third and final pattern: environmental denial until it's too late. Atlantis ignored the signs, the quakes beneath the ground, the restless sea, the warnings of the priests. The gods will protect us, they said. This island will never fall. But nature does not negotiate. The moment they dismissed balance, the earth took back everything. We too ignore our signs. 2025 marks the hottest year in recorded history, the 10th year in a row to break the same record. The Antarctic ice sheet is melting 6 times faster than it did in the 1990s. 1 in 4 species faces extinction. The great ocean currents that regulate the planet's climate are slowing down, quietly, steadily, like a heartbeat fading. Scientists warn of tipping points, but we comfort ourselves with deadlines that push responsibility into the future. 2050, 2100, not in my lifetime. The Atlanteans said the same thing. It won't happen to us. And one night, it did. We say, it won't happen to me. And it already is. Droughts where there were rivers, fires where there were forests, storms that tear apart entire coasts in hours. The earth is not punishing us. It is simply responding. Every flood, every drought, every lost species, each is a message written in water and ash whispering the same truth. Balance forgotten must one day be restored. We stand now where Atlantis once stood, brilliant, powerful, blind. They believed they were eternal. So do we. But eternity is not a gift. It's a responsibility. The myth is not a memory. It's a mirror. And what we see reflected in it is not the past, but the present. Our own civilization standing on the same shimmering edge, convinced it cannot fall. Yet the sea is already rising. The question is no longer about history, but about choice. We can repeat their story, or we can become the first civilization wise enough to end the cycle. The gods are not watching this time. The choice is ours.
Atlantis sunk beneath the waves, the sea closing like a slow heartbeat over its shining towers. Marble shattered, domes collapsed, gold dissolved into the deep. The ocean became its tomb, and memory its last breath. But the story did not end there. The sea has buried more than one world. Beneath its restless surface lie other civilizations, erased by time, still echoing faintly through the ages. Lemuria, Mu, Hyperborea, each rising toward brilliance, each vanishing without a trace. Lemuria was said to stretch across the Indian Ocean, a land of spiritual light and harmony, where sound itself was medicine and wisdom was sung to the stars. But when the earth shifted, the ocean rose to reclaim it. Now only whispers remain, coral shapes and myths of glowing temples below the sea. Mu, the empire of the Pacific, lived for 50,000 years, its people numbering in the tens of millions. They built floating cities, spoke with the winds, and watched the sunrise over crystal waters. Then, one night, the stars trembled, and the world of Mu sank in silence. No bones, no ruins, just memory carried by Polynesian chants and Mayan carvings. Before Atlantis, Mu had already fallen, leaving behind a warning written in the language of water. Hyperborea lay far to the north, a realm where the sun never set, where air shimmered gold and people lived in peace, untouched by war. But when the ice returned, it swallowed their temples and froze their songs into the wind. Humanity moved south, carrying fragments of that light within their myths. Lemuria, Mu, Hyperborea, Atlantis, each followed the same rhythm. Civilizations born of brilliance, destroyed by forgetting. The ocean remembers what we choose to ignore. Every age follows 4 silent beats: the rise, the peak, the decline, the fall. The rise begins with discovery, with wonder and unity. The world is new, hearts are open, humanity believes. Then comes the peak, abundance, confidence, monuments that touch the sky. The people feel immortal, but slowly decline slips in like shadow after sunset. Wealth becomes comfort, comfort becomes blindness, and wisdom gives way to pride. Then the fall. Sometimes it comes as fire, sometimes as flood, sometimes from within, soft, invisible, inevitable. Cities fade, languages die, and what remains becomes myth. The cycle repeats, always has, always will. Yet Atlantis left traces, signs carved into our world like fingerprints of memory. In Egypt, the pyramids rose suddenly, their geometry flawless, aligned with the stars. How did they know so much, so fast? In the Americas, the Maya charted cosmic cycles with impossible precision. Did they inherit fragments of Atlantean astronomy? Across continents stand the megaliths: Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, each built by unknown hands, each resonating with the same sacred proportion. Could these be echoes of a lost global knowledge spread from a single mother civilization? And then the flood myths, 200 cultures, all telling of a great deluge. Noah, Gilgamesh, Manu, Deucalion. Different names, same event. Was it history retold by survivors who refused to forget? No one can say for sure. Perhaps the truth sleeps beneath the ocean floor. Perhaps it sleeps within us. The lesson of Atlantis is not about stone or gold. It is about balance. Progress without wisdom destroys itself. Science without spirit blinds itself. Humanity without nature loses itself. Individual without community isolates itself. Balance is the rhythm that sustains civilizations. Atlantis fell because it forgot that rhythm, because it mistook power for purpose and conquest for creation. The true legacy of Atlantis is not its technology, but its silence.
a whisper beneath the waves, saying, "Do not rush to dominate. Learn to live in harmony." The sea is patient. It remembers everything. And beneath those same waters that cradle our reflection tonight, the ruins of Atlantis still rest, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Even the brightest civilizations fall, but wisdom, true wisdom, always returns. So close your eyes. Listen to the waves. They are not just water. They are memory. And if we remember deeply enough, Atlantis will never have to sink again.
And now, as the final echoes of Atlantis fade into the sea, take a deep breath. Feel the stillness. The ocean no longer speaks in thunder, but in whispers, the kind that reach the heart, not the ears. Somewhere beneath the waves, marble turns to coral, gold turns to sand, and stories become dreams again. But maybe that's how every civilization lives on, not in monuments or maps, but in the lessons it leaves behind. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the waves carry you, not downward, but inward, into the quiet place where memory and imagination meet. Atlantis is not gone. It simply waits, within the calm. Good night, traveler of time. May your dreams remember what the world forgot.